Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Barrow. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on this episode, I'm speaking with author JC Bernstein, and we're going to be talking about her book, Ignite Your Team, Using the Spark Method to Lead, Inspire, and Build a Team that Cares. As I was reading this book and having our conversation and preparing to put the podcast together, I kept thinking about that phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And really, to me, that's what we spoke about how important that is. And one of the things that we'll get into is a certain type of question that JC talked about around what's called the curiosity question and how important that is, as well as other things. We go through the 5 components to Spark, but that was one that really stood out to me in terms of how do we demonstrate to others that we care, just in that specific type of question. So let's get into it. JC, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. It's such an honor. And I know you're getting ready to launch this book right now and wanted to have you on to be able to talk about, especially the model and that really it revolves around, which is the Spark method that you created, and was hoping we could really start out there with an opportunity to talk about how did the model come about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to chat with you. Yeah, listen, the Spark method came about because I know that managers have been struggling. And I think that we all know that managers have been struggling with motivating employees for a long time. But I don't think that we realized just how disconnected managers have become from what motivates people until COVID happened. I think that really it's shown a spotlight and a magnifying glass all at the same time on just how far away we have kind of gone. We don't really understand what motivates people anymore. I think we've been using these kind of tactics and these methods for so long and assuming that they have still been working. So things like understanding the why behind your work, right? We think that if we explain the purpose behind somebody's work, that automatically it's just going to create motivation for people, but it doesn't. Just recognition and rewarding. We have this belief that if we just recognize great work and the results that they get, that they're automatically going to want to continuously look for that positive reinforcement, and they're going to just continue to go for that. But these things aren't working. It's just not working. And the reason they're not working the way that they used to is because those methods are all about us. They're all about the job. They're all about our results. And they really don't have anything to do with them, with the employees, what they care about, what motivates them, what drives them. So that's why I wrote out the Spark method, because I had implemented this when I was in stores and when I was an operator. And it's something that I have taught to leaders for so many years. I had just never kind of compartmentalized it into an actual method and an acronym. But I wanted to put something out there that was easy to understand and follow. And that's what the Spark method does. It teaches leaders how to understand their people, how to understand what motivates them personally, and how to connect to that without having to sacrifice their business and bend over backwards to give their employees everything that they want.
So along those lines, it seems like you start out in the right place, right? Just getting people to slow down, right? That's the first component of this. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. We are so busy, and it just feels like the expectation is that we get more done in less time. And the person that gets the most done is the top performer, right? The faster that they get it done, the more things they check off their to-do list, the better of a performer they are. And listen, productivity, getting things done, it's important, right? I'm not going to say that it's not, but there are drawbacks to it as well. When we kind of operate in this go mode consistently, it can feel productive, but it creates blind spots for us, right? Like we become unaware of these warning signs of things that are going on within our team that might end up holding us back and create these huge issues that will make progress take longer. It also, when we operate in go mode constantly, we start to give the wrong impression to our people, right? Because we just get focused on this like one track mind and we just execute our to-do list and we just go, go, go. And we start to become perceived as unapproachable, like we don't care. People stop coming to us. They stop asking questions. They stop sharing ideas. And before you know it, they're completely disengaged from the work because they don't think that you care. I think many times managers expect employees to come to them, right? To ask questions and to find the time and have the courage to approach them. But that's just not what's happening. They're just not working anymore and they leave.
I would agree. And you know what? I think about that too, around the amount of people that feel as though they're overwhelmed right now. And if I feel overwhelmed and I'm working for somebody that's go, go, go all the time, probably less comfortable going to this person and saying, I'm overwhelmed right now, because I look at them and I'm like, they're never going to understand that I'm overwhelmed. Exactly. They're going to say I'm weak.
They'll say you're weak, or they just aren't going to have time to care. You might just assume that they're going to say, listen, figure it out, right? I have to figure it out. You figure it out.
Which leads us to the next one around paying attention. And I found that one interesting too, in that what motivates employees is how I thought about that. And I thought about it from the standpoint of the world that we live in right now, the Great Resignation. I think so many people are focused on bonus and benefits, and are we missing the boat there in terms of what really motivates employees?
I think that we're not necessarily missing the boat, but we're just barely catching a glimpse of like a sliver of it, right? I think that sharing bonuses and benefits and things like that is great for attracting talent, but it's not going to motivate people to engage, to work harder, and to stay. And here's why. It's certainly attractive to hear all of those things, right? However, what motivates people to continuously work is one of three things. It's either survival, connection, or the sense of self. Okay, think about this for a second. We are going to do whatever we can to survive, right? We're going to make the money that we need to make in order to keep a roof over our heads, food to eat, clothing, health insurance, whatever it is, right? We need to find ways to survive, for sure. But then once you have those things, there are other things that people want. There are other things that drive people to take action, which really is what motivation is, if you think about it, right? Motivation at its definition is just a reason for people to act. So there are other reasons out there. And those two buckets, connection is a huge piece to it. Family, friends, any other type of community. Maybe it's a religious group. Maybe it's a CrossFit community. But wherever it is where people belong and they feel supported and they feel like they have community, that's important. And in this day and age, there's so much equated to working harder and longer, right? And what that does is it takes people away from those other pieces of their life, those components of connection that are so important.
There's a model that I will often reference, neuroscientist named David Rock, and he talks about 5 social needs in this acronym called SCARF. And the R in it is relatedness, our need to feel connection. It's like we're pack animals. That's
right. We absolutely are. Sometimes the connection isn't even outside of work. Sometimes people work for connection, right? Think about somebody who's retired and they're looking for a time gig, right? They may not have a lot of things to fill their time. So they might work to continue to have that connection, to speak to customers, to speak to their coworkers, right? So it could be inside work or outside of work, but connection is important. The other piece is a sense of self. And I think oftentimes this is something that managers gravitate to, right? People want to feel like they're worth something. You want to feed their self-esteem. You want to feed their self-worth. And I think a lot of times that's where we go to with like rewards and recognition and things like that. But it's really superficial. People associate self-esteem and self-worth in so many other ways. And there are so many different ways a manager can tap into that aside from just recognition or giving somebody a bonus check.
I often find that people, they don't need that. Just to be able to observe somebody and say, you know what, the other day when you did X, I want to let you know how much I appreciated that. Doesn't require me to pay them anything. And 10 minutes of my time, but can do so much for somebody in terms of elevating their level of status, right?
Yeah. I mean, I part in a study. I was one of a couple of people who led this study where we really wanted to identify what the root cause of turnover was. Why were people leaving and why were people choosing to stay? And we didn't do like a blanketed survey where there were kind of like questions and answers where you had to kind of like bucket your response into it, right? We did interviews. We talked to people. And within an organization, we identified the stores that were high turnover and the stores that were low turnover. And so we targeted those stores and we spoke to the leaders and we spoke to the employees, both current and past, because we wanted to get an idea, realistically speaking, what was it that caused people to leave and what was it that caused people to stay? And when we spoke to the managers, we started with them and it was really interesting because they initially right off the bat said money. People are leaving because of money and people will only stay if we give them money, right? More money, more money. They're only leaving for money. Now, when we spoke to the employees, that's not what they told us. They were being paid competitively, right? Their pay was fine. It wasn't the money. It was that there was nothing else keeping them there. And so that's why they started looking for something else. And when we spoke to the stores, the employees working in the stores who had really low turnover, here's what they told us. They stayed because managers were able to work with their scheduling needs. If they had to pick up their kids, they were able to leave and go do that. If they had classes that they were taking, they wanted to advance their career and they were looking to get a higher level of education, they supported their ability to dedicate time to those classes in some way, shape, or form. They heard what they needed to do with their time. They heard that what was going on in their lives personally outside of work. They recognized them as people and they accommodated that somehow. Okay, that was the first thing. The other thing, they just said thank you. They felt like they were appreciated. It wasn't extra money. It wasn't these big, huge contests with big prizes. Their manager just said thank you. And it wasn't for the extra things. It was for the basic things that they just showed up and did every day. Yeah. Showing up on time, right? Getting a project in on time, doing a really great job with some project or some assignment. Maybe it was just a routine assignment, but they just acknowledged that they did a really good job and they said thank you.
I love to hear you say that, JC, because when I have these conversations, I'm like, there are many organizations, I think, or individuals that have this flawed, this old style mentality of, well, why should we recognize them for what we pay them good money to do? I said, yeah, that might,
they don't have to do it for you.
Paper, but it doesn't work in the real world. Like people just like to feel as though they're appreciated for what they're doing. And to say to somebody, you know what, all this week, you have been here and showing up and getting things done. And I just want to let you know, I really appreciate that. You think they're not going to want to do it again?
But here's the thing, Patrick, what we don't realize, I think, is they don't have to do those things for us. They have other options, right? They don't have to choose us. In case we haven't noticed, we're still in this climate where there are more job postings than there are applicants out there, right? We're still there. So they have other options with employers. But in all fairness, we are in the culture of the side hustle. We really are. It is so easy for people to make money outside of the traditional job, right? They don't need us like they used to. So if somebody is choosing to come into work and do the basic job expectation for a paycheck for us, we need to say thank you because they don't have to do that for us anymore.
Yeah. You'll love this. I think I wrote an article on this and I said that I think in this environment, we need to do more with the participation trophies. And it was a play on like really just the amount of people that just showed up and didn't stay home and came into work and did participate, that I think we need to thank them. Like, thank you.
We should be thanking them. Absolutely.
So let's see, moving on. Calibrated questions.
Yeah, let's talk calibrated questions.
I love that. Do you mind? Because there was a quote in here too. It just hit me. A calibrated question is an intentional inquiry. I thought that was so powerful, the way that was said. So,
yeah. Here's the thing. I think that when we try to get to know people, when we try to get to know our employees, we have this idea that we need to build rapport with them, right? But what does that even really mean? It feels like a lot of times managers think of building rapport as just kind of making small talk. How's the weather? What'd you do this weekend? Did you see this movie? Right? But it doesn't actually uncover what matters to our people or who our people are, what they care about. So a calibrated question is an intentional question. It has a purpose. And that purpose is to identify what that driving core motivator is for that person. And it's different for everybody. And it's different at different stages of our life. But we want to ask questions that try to identify that. And there's a few different kinds of questions. So the first one is simply a confirmation question, right? You want to look for clues as to what people care about. There are visual clues, there's audible clues. People surround themselves with things that they care about. It could be a sports logo on their sweatshirt. It could be the type of car that they drive. It could be some pictures that they have at their desk. What are those pictures of, right? People surround themselves with things that matter to them. And then there's also the things that they talk about. People will talk about what they care about, whether it's good or bad, mind you. They will talk about what matters to them and what affects them. And that's important. So stay tuned into the clues and then ask questions based on those clues. So the first is the confirmation question. And that confirmation question is really just to clarify, does that thing actually have value to them? Let's say I'm assuming that someone's a sports fan or a Yankees fan because they come into work wearing a Yankees sweatshirt. Well, what if they just forgot their sweatshirt and their friend drove them to work and that was their friend's sweatshirt, right? You got to verify that that's actually something that matters to them first. But then once you identify something that matters, you got to get curious. And this is what I call the curiosity question. So that curiosity question goes deeper. And this is where you stay a while. And mind you, it does not have to be in one conversation. This is something that really unravels better just organically over time. Start to ask questions based off of that thing. How long have they been interested in something? What got them interested in something? How much time do they spend doing these things? Start asking questions to figure out how dedicated they are to this thing. And if they're really dedicated to it, it probably ties back to either survival, connection, or sense of self, and it matters, right? So once you've started to identify what you think that core motivator might be, you ask the last question, which is the clarifying question. And here you're just looking to make sure that you're actually on the right track, right? I'll tell you a quick story. So there was an employee, his name was Brian, and he used to drive in every once in a while, he would drive in with a Corvette. It was a classic Corvette and it was beautiful. And everybody just assumed that he just loved classic cars. And the more I talked to Brian about this classic car, the more I realized just how much time he puts into this thing. The detailing process was so specific. The products that he used, he researched for weeks and weeks, and they were very expensive. And one day a month, he spent hours detailing this thing. Like this thing mattered to him, right? And you would think he just loved classic cars. He was just a classic car guy. Maybe like I would think I would go into his house and see classic car magazines everywhere and that he was at classic car shows on the weekend. But then I asked him a question. It was the most ridiculous question, but it gave me so much information. All I said to him was, you really must love classic cars, don't you? And you know what he said to me? Nah. Like, what? What do you mean? Yeah, something's off here. You put so much time and energy into this car, and it is in such pristine condition. Why? If you don't love classic cars, why would you put so much time and money into this thing? He said, well, it was my dad's car. And my dad loved classic cars. He had 8 of them. And that was our thing. It was detailing these cars, right? And he was super passionate about it. His father passed away when he was 18. And this was the car that he kept from his collection. So all of the time and energy and money that he puts into this car is really about keeping that connection with his father alive. Yeah. It had nothing to do with a flashy car. It had nothing to do with loving classic cars. It was all about the connection to his dad. And everything that that guy does is in direct relation to connection to his family. Everything. He will not work an extra hour because it takes time away from his kids. He will work the hardest anybody ever has, and he will make more money in less time, but he is going to be out of the office at 5 o'clock because he's having dinner with his kids.
It's interesting in that regard too. I know there's research out there that has looked at when we ask people to talk about themselves, the pleasure part of their brain lights up to have questions asked of us about us. And then what it does is it activates the principle of liking. So here we are, by the more we take interest, sincere interest in other people, we build bonds with them. And again, an additional few dollars isn't going to sway somebody when they feel as though they're connected to where they are.
Yeah. But think about it for a second, right? It's more than just connection. It's more than just bonding. I now have a very powerful piece of information. When I'm making my plans on projects or anything strategic in my company, I now know that 9 to 5 time frame is all I'm going to get from Brian. And if I try to impose more on him, I'm probably going to lose him. That is a really powerful piece of information. So now I have kind of guardrails that I can follow as I kind of operate my business. So it's a huge advantage that I have.
I was one of those, by the way, a company that I was working for when I was in the biotech industry. I had a manager that it was an after hours thing, and my daughter it was either a track or a basketball game that night. And I vividly remember this, is that it wasn't something that was planned for us to do. And he wanted me to attend this function. And I said, no, I'm not going. A week later, when we traveled together, he said, basically, if you're going to move throughout this company, you're going to make sacrifices for your family. I didn't say it to him at the point, but it was at that point, I was just like, I'm not staying here. I won't do that.
Eye-opening, right?
Yeah.
Very eye-opening. And people make the choice then. They might not leave then, but they make the choice to start disengaging then. And you're not going to get as much out of them anymore.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I did, is that from that moment on, I was sort of plotting my exit.
That's right.
It wasn't a place. It was values too. They just didn't align. This kind of goes along with it then in terms of reading responses. After you're asking the question, is being aware of
how they're responding. Yeah. So a response sign is a really interesting thing. It's like a hint to what they're really saying and thinking, right? Because not everybody is going to tell us exactly what they're really thinking and feeling, but we have ways to pick up on it. So there's a little bit of a song and dance that goes along with asking these questions of curiosity and reading response signs, right? You want to pick up on their body language. If somebody kind of perks up and they sit up in their seat, they're all of a sudden making eye contact, they're smiling, something matters to them in a really great way. And also, if somebody starts talking a lot more about something, they're probably really excited about something. So you're on track, right? Read that as a positive sign and keep going. Stay there for a while because you're on track to something. But also, on the flip side, if somebody starts talking about something a lot that they don't like, right? They're really negative about something or they're criticizing something. I think we miss this a lot as a huge opportunity to identify what somebody cares about. Because when somebody's complaining about something or they're angry about something, what that's telling us is there's something that's happening within your organization that is triggering them somehow. It's affecting something that they care about in a negative way. And if we stay there a little bit more and we start to ask more questions about what's going on, what's the message behind the message that they're telling us, we really have an opportunity to understand what drives that person. I worked with a labor attorney once. I was so blessed to work with him. It was when I first went into kind of a human resources role. And he sat me down during my orientation and said to me, listen, employee relations issues are very simple to understand, and many times we overcomplicate it. The reality is that the majority of grievances that are filed, the majority of complaints that come out of a store are simply a manager's failure to identify a message behind a message. There are always warning signs, but we miss them for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe we're too busy, we're going too fast, and we miss the signs. But maybe react emotionally to somebody who's upset, right? All of a sudden it threatens our authority. We have to come down on them. We want to one-up them, put them in their place, right? And instead, what we should be doing is stopping for a second, sitting back, getting quiet, and listening, and then asking more questions, calibrated questions to understand what's really going on, because there's a clue to their motivation there. And we're just passing it by.
Yeah. When I think about that, I think too of curiosity is the way that we have to listen or observe. It's about trying to read what's behind. There's some fascinating work that I've used by a gentleman named Joe Navarro. He wrote a book called What Everybody is Saying, and he was an FBI agent, was involved in interrogation, and they used a catalog that they had created over 20 years with the autonomic nervous system, where they would identify tells in individuals. Somebody rubs the front of their face, you can tell potentially like they're nervous or they're uncomfortable or all these different things. And again, I think we don't do enough of that, of cueing in on nonverbals.
You're going to have to send me the name of that book because now I'm super interested. I love it.
You're going to love it. It comes with a PDF too. It is so cool.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Send it to me.
Yeah, I will. Number 5, how do we put this all together, right? It's the connection piece or understanding that. Is that?
So the key to this, and the majority of the Spark method, is just trying to understand your people and what they care about and identify that thing, right? The last step is to just make that connection. The majority of the time, if you think about it, we identify our high performers, our motivated employees, by the people who already see the connection, right? They're probably motivated to move up in our company. They see the value there, so they put in the effort. We see the rest of them, the other 90% of our employees, as unmotivated, but it's not that they're not motivated. They care about something, right? They just don't see the connection between fulfilling what matters to them and working for us. So we have to make that connection. And so the first step is to identify what they care about. And then the second step is to just figure out how to connect. Now, in the book, I go through a variety of different ways to do that. I'm going to give you 4 of my favorite. Okay. So the first one is just a simple check-in. Never underestimate the power of a simple check-in. It goes so far. And what I mean by check-in is you've identified that something matters to a person. Let's say somebody has a family, their oldest is a senior in high school, they're going to look at colleges, right? So they're probably taking a lot of time off to go on this college hunt and to go look at colleges. And if you find this out, what if the second they came back, their first day back, you ask them, how did the college hunt go, right? What if a month later, completely unsolicited, you say, hey, I remember you were looking at colleges with your kids. What are they planning on studying, right? Just showing that you care is so powerful. That's something that can't be replaced, right? They can't find that with another comparable paycheck at another organization. The fact that you see them and what matters to you matters to them is huge. Well, let me flip that around for a second. What matters to them, the fact that you remember what matters to them speaks volumes because now you're important to them.
So on that one, I was working with a group probably, I don't know, this is close to 10 years ago. And we were talking about something along these lines about how do you value your employees. And one of the managers in the group started smiling. I was sort of like, well, what's up? What are you smiling about? Because I remember the best manager that I had, he said, would like on Thursdays, Fridays, start going around the room, and they were in cubicles. So he would hear him asking like, what are you doing for the weekend? What are your plans? All that sort of what would seem like superficial stuff. But he said what never failed to happen is Monday, Tuesday, he was going back around and saying, hey, your daughter was in a gymnastics tournament. How did that end up? Right. And he closed the circle. So it demonstrated to everybody like, it wasn't just some circus trick of I got to ask this question at the end of the week. I really care and I'm going to follow up.
That's right.
Makes a huge difference.
Huge difference. And you never find that. I mean, when was the last time anybody out there had their boss completely unsolicited just pick up the phone or stop by their cubicle and say, hey, how'd that go last weekend?
Yeah.
How was that concert? Right? It never happens.
Yeah.
It never happens. So it goes a long way. Another one is to use recognition strategically. And one of the components to this that I think is so powerful is to reward with things that are important to that person, right? This goes beyond just like a nice handwritten note. We're talking, let's say somebody did a great job on a big assignment and that assignment has now closed and you were happy with their work. What if instead of a $50 gift card, you recognize that they were super passionate about traveling in Europe and they were planning their next big adventure? What if you brought them some sort of book about backpacking through Europe or whatever it was, right? That's a very, very personal thing. So Reward intentionally with things that matter to them personally. Another one is, and I think this gets overlooked all the time, but to keep the good stuff coming. And here's what I mean by that. Every role, even if it's our dream job, has components that we love and that we absolutely just hate, right? It's always going to happen. And if you are not aware of what that balance is in terms of how much time they're spending on the things that they love to do and the things that they really don't like to do, then you run the risk of their time being completely taken over by the things that they don't love to do. And you're not going to feed that fire of motivation with the things that they really care about. Here's an example. When I was in human resources and I had this kind of hybrid role, I would do a lot of employee relations investigations, and I hated them. They were valuable. I learned a lot of information about them, but there is only so much complaining and criticizing and more complaining that you can take, right? It's very taxing. It really takes a toll on you after a while, especially when you're sitting there for 3-4 hours at a time and you're just listening to everybody talk about everything that's wrong with everything, right? It really brings you down. But I also had a component to my job where my job was to identify patterns there and create trainings for leaders so that they could get in front of issues like that and just kind of resolve them, right? And that's what I loved doing. And so if my employee relations investigations workload got so heavy that I didn't have time to do my trainings and deliver this feedback and this knowledge to the managers that I was supporting, I probably would have left. I probably would have, because it was just too much of what I hated to do. I had to have those healthy doses of doing the things that I love to do. And so if you understand what those are for people and you're constantly kind of keeping alert to how they're spending their day and what their workload is with the things they love and the things they don't, you can interject and help them create a balance that is just more motivating in general.
Yeah. I can't remember where I read it. It might have been Marcus Buckingham years ago in a series of questions, which was around sort of work what he was doing with Gallup, was on the best day of work, what were you doing? What do you generally do to try and get that, right? Because I bet you're doing this work, and then try and find as much time as you can to make sure that they do that.
That's right. And it's never going to be the same thing, right? We can't assume that we know what it is. It's never going to be the same thing for the same person.
Love it. It's a great one.
Yeah. The last one is to bring outside motivation in. And this is really powerful for those people who are kind of placed properly in role. They're not going to grow within the organization. Maybe they're at their salary cap. You're not going to be able to offer them more money, right? They still need to have motivation too. You need to be able to connect it to work. So how do you do that? The best way to do that is to bring outside motivation in. Let's say they're passionate at football, right? Have them lead off some sort of fantasy football league or draft or whatever it is. Let's say they're passionate about planning parties. Have them plan the holiday party, right? Find ways to bring what they love to do and they're passionate about into work so that you make that connection. It doesn't cost you a penny. It'll probably help boost morale with everyone else too, right? And they're able to kind of spill over a little bit that passion into the workplace. And that creates a connection that's harder to break.
I think that's a great one too. And again, it's something that you know that they love to do. It's probably going to be done the best.
That's right.
Everybody doing it. What do you think is the biggest challenge? If I'm a manager, we're sitting down, we're talking about this. What do you recommend to me first?
Here's what's so important to understand. Anything new is you're going to question it and you're going to question yourself implementing it and using it, right? So allow yourself a little bit of grace. Take small components of it and start to implement these things into your day-to-day life. Then, once you start to implement these things into your work life, reflect back on it. Go back to the book, go back to the steps, start remembering all of the components that were discussed and reflect on how well you picked up on things. Were there signs that you missed in the moment? There could have been. There absolutely could have been. Were there questions that you could have phrased a little bit differently that would have gotten more information than you already had? Maybe, and that's okay. So start just reflecting back on your day and start to just make small tweaks. Just allow yourself a little bit of grace, right? Because it's going to be new. But I think too, what happens is new managers, when they try something new, they might not see the results immediately. And so they just stop. Commit to a certain time frame and find ways to remind yourself to do these things. So maybe if you're a big user of Post-its, maybe you put a Post-it on your computer and you remind yourself, spark, or maybe it's just slow down, right? Maybe you're just reminding yourself of the first step, take it step by step. Maybe you set a reminder on your phone. Maybe if you're a time blocker, you block out time in your day and you make an intention to start to implement this stuff. My favorite is what I call habit stacking, where this is where you attach a new habit to an old habit, right? So it helps you build that muscle memory for a new habit. So let's say every morning I run to Starbucks and I get myself a cup of coffee before my 11 o'clock meeting, whatever, right? Maybe during that process, as I'm walking by all of my employees, that's when I take a moment to slow down and I start to observe. Or maybe that's my opportunity to start asking some questions and follow up on some information that I may have learned a week ago or the day before, right? Start attaching pieces of the Spark method to things that you already do every day so that you can start to build that new habit. This is not something that should be like implemented in one shot, right? This is literally a methodology that can be woven into what you already do every single day in little just bite-sized pieces. Those would be my piece of advice.
It's interesting that you talk about sort of using your calendar too. For me, I actually set off 10:30 and 3:30 as just blocks. If I were working on one part of this, I would just put in there, on connecting or asking questions or something to remind me at 10:30 in the morning. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, have I been doing that? Haven't I? And then at 3:30 in the afternoon, I do that. Those are the two times that help me to sort of on new things that I'm trying to implement habit-wise. Last question. How do we get a hold of the book?
Well, the book can be found at any of the places that sell books. So go find your favorite place and go ahead and grab it, your team.
This model, as I've read through these, I love, especially the first one, the slowing down to me is so overlooked in terms of what we do. So thank you for taking the time to share these and certainly wishing you the best of luck as the launch happens and more people get to learn about the Spark method. Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.